All right, everybody. Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is Megan's Monday Market Update. We've got Matt Stancato here with Guild Mortgage Lending, and today we're going to be talking about tariffs, not just tariffs as a whole, how they work, how they're intended to operate, and then potential repercussions. So, Matt, why don't we dive into this a little bit more? Everyone knows that the Trump administration came out and made some really big, bold moves on setting some tariffs in place with Canada, Mexico, and even China. And there's been a lot floating around on this topic. So tell me a little bit more about it.
Sure. Tariffs are a tool that hasn't really been used much in recent years. Trump is huge on them. A lot of the question about whether or not the tariffs are going to be effective has to do with what he's trying to accomplish. And I don't think that anybody really knows what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish, maybe up to and including Donald Trump. But he's, in any event, these tariffs, if they're being used as leverage to accomplish discrete goals, that's one thing. If they're being put in place because he believes tariffs are a good idea in and of themselves and should remain in place long term or permanently, that's a different calculation. And I'm not quite sure from what I'm seeing and hearing which one it is or what it's going to be. I do know that when you talk about Donald Trump, you have to be fair in saying that his speaking style is very different from most politicians we're familiar with. If Barack Obama were to come out and say, I love tariffs, I want 25% tariffs across the board forever, he would never do that. But if he did, I would say, there's something I don't know here. But Barack Obama is a very careful man who says very careful things. And I think he means what he says. When Donald Trump says that, maybe he's being hyperbolic. Maybe he's speaking off the top of his head. Maybe he's just gassing himself up. Maybe he's being serious. It's hard to tell. And because of that, the market often doesn't know how to react to these things either. So starting from the beginning, a tariff is simply a tax on a foreign import. And when you talk about a tariff, it increases the price of those foreign goods because China's not going to take it in the butt if we increase their goods 10%. They're just going to increase the price 15% for us or whatever it is.
Yes. And on that topic, we can play out a hypothetical here, right? Let's say tequila, right? We're importing tequila and we have now a 25% tariff on the tequila imports. Well, you have two options here. Either, the price of your tequila is going to go up by 25%, or the tequila company has to split that cost in some ratio. You don't know if it's going to be 50-50 that they're going to eat some of the cost. You don't know if it's going to be 30, 70. You don't know. And ultimately, it kind of puts you in a pressure point because what'll end up happening as an alternative is that the consumer, being you or me or whomever is going to the liquor store to buy a bottle of tequila, may say, hey, am I going to buy this tequila from Mexico, or am I going to go start looking for tequila that is from other places that is not as expensive? So I think that it could create an opportunity for competition potentially within different market spaces if it's done properly. But I don't foresee that companies or countries in general are just going to eat this tariff cost. They're definitely going to offset it, and it's going to work its way down the chain. Whether it's initially offset it to the companies, and then the companies therefore offset it down to the consumer.
Rest assured, it'll go to the consumer. Companies are very, very unlikely to take to take that loss themselves. But that's what tariffs are and what they do. They're to increase prices. The question is what happens next. In your example about tequila, very good example. The best tequila comes from Mexico. The tequila we want comes from Mexico. There is tequila made in the United States. Hell, they make some down in Phoenixville, right? But it's not Herreras, or you know what I mean? It's not the good stuff. So in that case, that ends up being the kind of tariff that you want to use as a leverage point. For instance, when Trump announced the tariffs and then it requested help securing the border against fentanyl, and Mexico agreed and sent 20,000 troops or whatever it was, Trump said, okay, we're going to pause those tariffs now. That's good tariff, Trump, right? Like that. I think that those are used as discrete points as discrete goals. I think that works really well. On the other hand, you could look at something like a Chinese steel tariff, right? Now, steel is steel is steel. You don't get better steel necessarily from China. It's just less expensive. So when you have steel from China, that and you tariff that, that ends up increasing demand for now competitively priced American steel. So you reshore manufacturing as one of the effects of that particular tariff. Now, do you want it in place long term? Well, that depends. What do you think is going to happen? If you believe that the economy is more of a set, it's more of a set pie, right? Then you may believe that uh, increasing and you're going to leave this in place permanently, that you might believe that increasing prices overall is only and ever a bad thing. But there can be second and third order effects that take place from instituting a tariff that can help the economy long term. So while tariffs raise prices and are, therefore inflationary, or you can look at it as they cause inflation, which therefore raises prices. It's all interconnected, right?
Sure.
Yeah, you can look at it either way. You can also say, okay, so what's the long-term effect of reshoring American steel? Well, you would probably get more competitive prices in America. If we reshored American steel, we would have right to work states competing with union states, right? For who can make cheaper steel. You wouldn't have to ship it in huge ocean going liners. You'd be able to move it more cheaply in the United States. So there's nothing more inflationary, as tariffs are inflationary, and they are. There's nothing more inflationary than government spending. It's because the government prints the money in general or borrows it and then lends it out to be used again in the economy. And once it hits the economy, it's inflationary again by virtue of being too much money chasing too little product in the economy. All right, so you might say something like, okay, well, we think it's important for the United States to spend $1 billion on researching green energy, right? That might be a priority in for you, and you can say, okay, we're going to spend that money, but we're not going to get any of that money back right now. This is forward thinking stuff, right? So that's money we're just going to spend. That's inflationary, right? But the question is, what are you getting for that inflation? And inflation is basically a diffuse tax on all people, right?
Right.
So what are you getting for that additional inflation tax? Well, we're getting $1 billion worth of research into green energy, which for you may or may not be worth it. So just like tariffs, you have to look at what we are trying to accomplish versus what's going to actually happen.
Right. Absolutely. I'm very concerned about two things.
Mhm.
One being, what type of strain is this going to put on some of the relationships we have? And specifically for me, like our closest allies being like Canada, how they are receiving this information has been not well. They've come out publicly that they're not happy with the tariffs, as could be expected. So I'm really curious to see how this administration ends up navigating those relationships, because I mean, Canada is like our cousins, right? Our sisters, our brothers, we love them. And so we would like to keep the lines of communication pretty open with them as an ally. So I'm curious to see how they're going to tackle that, and on a political side, not just the tariffs, but I think the tariffs being like day one in office, being the first thing that was very much a priority to the Trump administration coming forward, really set the tone. I think I said this before we hopped on this call, was I'm curious to see if Trump is really going to hold fast with this 25% or higher tariff on auto and pharmaceutical goods and things like that, because I almost wonder if it was a little bit of a bluff to kind of shock them into getting used to the idea of
Very
a tariff in general. And maybe it'll come in at 18% or something of that nature. And it's not really going to be 25%. I mean, time will tell. I think he said he was going to be posting this information April 2nd. He was going to have more details for the public around that. So we'll stay tuned and give that update once we have it.
the fact
So I'm
that
watching.
the fact that it's a month out that he's drafting this policy and it's not something he's posting on Truth Social makes me think that perhaps it is a more staid and considered policy than
Yes.
than what people are afraid that it is. Yeah, without getting into the politics one way or the other, there's a lot of unsurety because tariffs at this level being proposed for this length of time, not in wartime, hasn't happened since the 19 the aughts, like the 1900s, I think, by which I mean like 1900 to 1909. I
Yeah.
think it's been a really long time, and the use of them has fallen out of favor precisely because we've become a more international um, world, right? The idea of free trade is the idea of no tariffs. So when you sign something like NAFTA, right, what you're saying
Mhm.
is we're not going to tariff at all. Now, when Trump comes in and does this, it's a sea change. It's a whole other thing than what we've been doing. And I think people aren't quite understanding the depth of the change that is being made right now. Whole systems are being shaken down, and whether or not you like that is up to you. But it's gonna things are gonna function differently than they have for the last 80 years of liberal global consensus. And whether or not that ends when Trump is done, or and the left is elected back into office, or whether or not it continues along this direction, is what the next 4 years are going to tell. In a weird way, we're sort of at an inflection point that doesn't come around but once a couple of generations.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think, you think about all of these things leading up to this, with COVID a few years ago, and people are still talking about it. Like, why are you still talking about COVID? Because everyone knows the implications of that, the drive of inflation, the housing market rising, all of these things that have kind of, I would say, propelled during that time period to now have got us exactly where we are. The printing of stimulus checks, the effect that that even had on the economy at the time. And so here we
Absolutely.
are, and we're talking about housing being the most unaffordable it's ever been. And I'm saying that I'm a realtor. So it's like my interest is that I want you to buy or sell, right? And I'm saying that honestly, like affordability is just low for people. Rents are really high. Eggs are going up. Like cost is very high for people. And if you're somebody who was barely getting by before, you have now fallen below the poverty line for sure. Like it's struggle times for some people who are watching this. So when we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about goods going up even more. It's very scary for some people because you're saying, what is this going to look like? How is this going to affect my daily life, my family? You talk about an auto tariff. Well, Kia is very affordable, right? It's a very cheap car. And if you're looking in the market for a cheap, reliable vehicle, you're probably going to go with a Kia or something of that nature. Well, that's an import, right? That is not an American made company. So now we're going to be raising the costs of cars and
Yeah,
other things. So if you're a family and you're going, hey, I just had a kid, I need a reliable vehicle to get to and from work. You know what I mean? We're past the point of being able to buy a car for $25,000. Let's just put it that way.
sure. Yeah, that is, I think, again, that the full effects of the inflation that we experienced over the last couple of years are still being felt. There are knock-on effects from that level of inflation that will ripple through the economy for a decade. When COVID first happened, I told my kids, what you do this year and in the next couple of years will define what your childhood was, because this is your moment. That our 9/11, when I was 19 years old,
Mhm.
um, or 20 years old or close to it anyway. And then I was like, this is what's going to happen to you that'll shape the way you see things. And it definitely did. So I don't think that people have fully come to grips with the way that inflation and two, almost three once in a lifetime financial events happening hard on one another have changed the way that American affordability is for the time being. The question is, how do we get back to a place where two reasonable jobs can provide for a family? Or
Yes.
one reasonable job at a high school and somebody staying home. Whatever your ideal setup is, how do we make it possible for more people? And that's what long-term tariffs make me afraid of. Is
Okay.
we keep them on there for no, if we keep them on there just to have them on there, just to establish trade dominance, just to reshore manufacturing, price be damned, or something like that, that's a move I would think would be very foolish in both the short term and the long term. If
Yeah.
these are negotiating tactics being used by a person for whom negotiation is often more a sledgehammer than a scalpel, then it works and it's useful. And I wish I knew what this guy was going to do next, but perhaps that's part of what makes it effective.
Yes, well, I'm sure that the world leaders are all looking at us with the same question marks that we all are currently having right
Again,
now.
guys, really?
So, but to to paint things in a more positive light,
Mhm.
we understand the intention behind tariffs. We understand wanting to bring manufacturing back to the States. We understand wanting to ultimately, in the short term, you're stunting a lot of the growth with inflationary action, hoping that we will increase manufacturing at home and do these other things. We could go into this even deeper about, do we even have the infrastructure to bring manufacturing back here? Could we actually even manufacture all the goods that we are currently importing from other countries? Um, you know, that would be a long tangent, a conversation about how that would play out. And
Yeah.
and ultimately, you don't 100% know. You're just seeing where the dominoes fall and kind of following the trail of thought with that. So, but knowing what I know now, when he first came out and he said 25% tariff, my mind went, "You're tariffing everybody? 25%? Like, what are you talking about? Like, this is
Everybody
insane."
across the board, right?
I'm like, this just doesn't even make sense. There's no way this is going to happen. And then have it refined and bring it in, the shock factor like wearing off a little bit. He's like, no, 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 we're gonna do 10% on Canadian energy. We're gonna do 25% on auto and pharmaceutical, and we're gonna do 10% to China. So okay, so now we're being more specific. We're attacking either specific markets or industries. Okay, I can see a strategy plan kind of playing out here, maybe. So I am eager to see how this pans out as well. I'm more interested to see how this is going to affect the real estate market for, like I said, an already a low affordability situation. How do you think it's going to affect the real estate market?
Well, just like anything else that affects inflation, if we have more inflation caused by tariffs, interest rates are going to go up. That's the way it's going to work. If there's any mitigating factors working against that, I cannot see what they are short or midterm. It may very well be that, I mean, let's say we use it to economically crush China and then, we become the global economic hegemon. I mean, that's a long term W. You know what I mean? But short to midterm, it's like I don't see what a broad scale permanent universal tariff would do except for increase rates and inflation. Now, again, that being said, if you're doing it for a reason, and that reason is greater than whatever expenses being accrued, by
Yeah.
that decision, then you make your decision. You make your cost benefit analysis the way you otherwise would. Um, but if we're not getting anything back, and all we're doing is having tariffs on because somebody cares for tariffs, that's not great.
Yeah.
It's
I
very, very
also,
poor, in fact.
something else I want to hit on is we had a lot of changes as realtors in the last year, right? Actually, last year and a half, 2 years, and one of them being is how we structure our pay. So now we are making sure that buyers are signing contracts, right? Understanding that they are responsible for paying their buyer's commission. And
Mhm.
although this has always been the case, and then we negotiate with the seller who usually has more capital, right?
Mhm.
We tie the cost in and then the seller reimburses for the costs. You understand how that works. My thought process, piggybacking off of tariffs, is this: affordability is low. People are needing to bring more money to the table now to get to closing to buy a house than ever, right? Thank God we have some seller assists and other things coming in. But hypothetically, let's say a family has saved $25,000 or $20,000 and they're looking to buy a house and it's going to be an owner occupied situation. Well, now you've got one medical expense, inflation going up, and a car expense.
Mhm.
And that money is wiped out. It's gone. They no longer have the funds to make a purchase for their family. And this is sort of where my mind is going when I'm thinking about the effects of this and how I think it's going to indirectly affect the real estate market, because it's been shared many, many times before that the average American doesn't even have $1,000 in their savings account for an emergency fund. So you think about these families who take the time to save all of this money to get in the door. And then I'm talking about the average person. Okay. I'm not talking about the person who's running a big corporation. I'm not talking about the influencer that's on the internet that's making all this money off of YouTube. Just the average person who just American dream wants to buy a house. I'm concerned for them and what it's gonna and what this is gonna do for their family. Because doing that, these tariffs, the inflation, the situation, the current market is setting people behind years, right?
This
Years.
is
And that's the reality. And that's detrimental because you and I both know that home ownership in year 2, 3, 4, 5, that equity, that growth you get those 5 years, unmatched. It's fantastic, right?
absolutely.
They're missing
It
out on
opens up
that
a lot of
opportunity now because they're being set back on the totem pole, right? So,
that is certainly a concern. I mean, we're just now getting 4 years worth of inflation to start to come to heel just recently. And even with that, you have one outlying statistic like eggs, or one outlying statistic like what was it, lodging away from home. I think we talked about the California wildfires
yeah,
last week. You have one number in there, and you're at such a delicate stage of curbing inflation that anything can cause it to go up. So yeah, I mean, misuse of tariffs, if it causes unchecked inflation, is the worst and last thing that we need right now. I mean, the inflation is the last thing we need right now. We need inflation to come under control such that rates can start to come down so that everything will open up market wise. Anything that delays that is working against us
yeah.
and working against home buyers as well.
Absolutely. Now, the caveat to that is if you're somebody who, is in a different financial situation, maybe you have cash, maybe you've worked with and collaborated with other people, you're doing house flipping, you're doing some sort of larger investment situation. You're loving this. You're saying, heck yeah, let the tariffs come, let it all break, let it burn down because I'm going to swoop in with my cash and I'm going to buy. And listen, that's capitalism. Okay. Like I get it. That's just how it works. Good for you. If you want to be in that position, talk to somebody about strategizing, partners, save your funds. That's a conversation for a different day. But ultimately, depending on which side or which person I just described to you, will have a huge impact on whether or not you like these tariffs or not.
Yeah, and that's for me, it comes down to effect. So let's if it what tariffs are going into place, we don't know. What effect will they have? We don't know. How long will they last? We don't know. So we can sit here and catastrophize and say it's going to be awful, or we can
Yeah,
sit here and blow smoke and say that it's going to be the greatest and the golden age is starting, and we can say anything we want to, but we're not going to know until we know what the plan is and how it's going to be instituted. So
absolutely.
think of what we just said today as two ways to look at it. You
Mhm.
can either look at it as here's the bad outcome if these tariffs are used wrong, or you can look at it as here's the other outcome. We get a temporary price hike, which hurts rate, which if things are getting better in other areas, maybe rates hold steady and then rates get a little bit better. And that happens because the entire economic climate gets better in the United States and a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So you can say either one of these may happen. We don't know.
Absolutely. We're playing devil's advocate here on this one. We're just playing both sides of the spectrum, positive or negative. I will ask you though, let's just make a prediction. What do you think? Is it going to be leaning more towards the negative or the positive? Just make a prediction.
I don't think that. I think that as the tariffs are instituted, we're going to see higher rates and higher inflation. That's just a fact. The,
Uh-huh.
the only important thing to me is whether or not we're getting something out of it that's worth that, or
Mhm.
whether or not we're simply trying to raise money this way in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. So let's say we put 10% taxes on everybody around the world, right? Or
Yeah.
tariffs around the world. And then we said there's no more income tax. I'm pulling this out of the air, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you would say to yourself, well, hold on a minute. This tariff thing ain't so bad because my prices go up, yes, but I'm keeping 35% more of my money, right? So what am I getting for this? So that's not going to happen. So that's a pie in the sky the other way. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? But yeah, it all depends on what happens. But if we have indiscriminate tariffs, it would be the same as indiscriminate government spending. It would have the same effect.
So I'm going to be honest with you. When I first thought about tariffs, I was kicking and screaming about the whole thought of it. I was very negative. I'm like, I just can't even fathom just pushing the inflation, even higher than it already is right
Yeah.
now. So I have been very humdrum about all of it. I have since then changed my mind a little bit as I'm starting to grasp and understand more about targeted tariffs. Like you said, we're going to get more of a plan. We're going to have more of an idea of what the intention is behind it. I'm going to play this off as short term, painful, long term, positive. That's my prediction, as simple as I can make it. I think I'm hoping and praying at least that the long term side effects of doing this, we're all going to be really glad we did it, that it actually helped heal the economy, and that in like a decade, we'll all be saying, hey, we're so glad we did that. That's the optimist in me, though. Just trying to stay as positive as possible and making adjustments as needed when things change. So,
My instinct is that one of two things happens. Either this is mostly bluster being
mhm.
used to position us in the world, or the minute that inflation starts to tick back up and we're paying $9 for eggs instead of the 8.25 I paid yesterday, the minute Trump gets that feedback from the public and the approval ratings start to drop, I don't think he would keep it on there, because I think more than anything, he likes his approval ratings.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that.
that that
So,
that feedback affects him directly in a way that it wouldn't affect, like a Barack Obama directly. Barack Obama was very aware of it, but he wasn't going to change course based upon people saying, "Oh, we don't like that." Whereas,
no, the public influence, I should say, or perception, tends to guide him one way or the other.
he's a populist.
A lot of yeah, on a lot of his choices. So, which could be good, I suppose, if he's moving in the direction you want him to.
Wait, who he's
uh,
listening to? You know what I mean? It's a
yeah.
whole thing. It's kind of amazing. I think we're at a very weird moment, and I think the election was about one overwhelming question, and I think that's: do you believe that Trump is in a unique position to break American systems, or do you believe that American systems were already broken?
Both.
Depending on which one you believe more, depending on who you think is the greater threat, the way it was, or what Trump represents, that was the litmus test of November. That's
Yeah.
I think that's what people, and that's why these tariffs are being allowed to be implemented in a way that I don't think any other president prior to Trump would have been able to do it, because
No.
ever since
No.
Kennedy, we wouldn't have had any kind of support for it
Yeah.
um, in the public, and it's a weird moment.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. So we touched all kinds of things
Yeah,
today,
dude, it's crazy.
both sides of the argument. I want to know what your thoughts are. Comment, subscribe, like, tell us what you think is going to happen or what your predictions are. We're open to hearing it. As always, I will link Matt's information at the bottom. If you have any questions, lending questions, pre-approval information, he is nationwide, so he can help you get you connected with somebody or at least start the process for you.
Happy to
And
help.
then I am out of the state of PA, but if you are in another state, please feel free to call me. I'm happy to get you connected with somebody that's local to you and help you on your home search. And don't feel disheartened about current state of affairs. Things can always get better. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, great seeing you. I'll see you next week.